Chapter 12. Jin. Names had always held a certain level of importance in Jin's family. Each of her brothers and she had been christened after important friends and family from either side of their parents' families. Ehrenfeld was named after his paternal grandfather. Alson was given a derivation of his father's name, Alvaro. She had been given the name of one of their closest friends, Auntie Hildegard Chaula. Auntie Hildegard was a hero, is still, though the hype had died down in the past 50 years. One of the side effects of being an international celebrity, though, is that people will want to name their children after you. So, even though she was named after Hildegard because of their family connection, tens of thousands of little girls born in the 5 years after first contact were named Hildegard, or Hildy for short. So she grew up with at least one or two other girls in each class sharing her name. As soon as she started university, though, she switched to her middle name, Juniper, which eventually led to her becoming known by Jin to friends. She suffered her family calling her Hildy, but for all others, she was Jin. Despite her personal rejection of the name, her aunt had never brought it up or otherwise shown that she had taken offense. They had in fact grown closer since Jin had become an adult and moved to live and work in Hosa Bengaluru, the lunar capital. Jin had her own apartment at Isro Station, one of the oldest sections of Hosa Bengaluru, but for the past 5 years, when her father had been off Luna, she had occupied his suite at Unity Station. So even though many of her personal effects and research had colored the decor for a long time, the official sense of the space being hers changed things. She had kept the apartment, which was little more than a 2-by-3 meter closet underground, out of a sense of either investment or sentiment. Now, though, she didn't need it, and had scheduled the transfer of the remainder of her belongings to the suite soon after the departure of both of her brothers, Ehrenfeld back home to Wien, and Alson further out to Tiras. She envied him, Alson that is, in his new adventure. Not so much her elder brother. Earth no longer held her interest as it once had, and besides, she hadn't really gotten along with him as well as she did with Alson, as they were closer in age. Ehrenfeld had been born early in her parents' marriage, and they had waited 10 years before expanding the family again. As Jin methodically sorted through the container of her belongings, finding and placing them in their new homes on shelves and compartments, her mind wandered back to a week ago. Her father's wake had been one of the largest events in recent memory for most who had attended. The feeds were still talking about who had been there and what had been said. There were multiple bioflicks of the late ambassador's life as well, none of them she deigned to pay any attention to. She had been there for much of it, or at least read about it in the moment. Of course, she wasn't there for the highlight of most of the biographies, first contact, when Alvaro Hernandez and Hildegard Chaula had stood face to face with the first aliens that had ever been encountered by humans. They had been thrust into the spotlight for all time. Alvaro, her father, had ultimately become the first ambassador to humanity's new neighbors. Hildegard had worked her way through the ranks of the newly formed fleet of the Confederation to eventually earn the highest rank of admiral, one she held to this day, despite pushing 80 years of life. When Jin's mind returned to the present, her legs had fallen asleep and the habitat lights outside of the suite had dimmed, indicating evening. She must have been sitting on the floor now for a few hours. Losing circulation in the low gravity of Luna was not an easy thing to do. Or perhaps it was due to her age, and the fact that she didn't practice her low-grav exercises as often as was recommended. Jin wasn't generally one to reminisce, so it was obvious to her that her internal retrospective of her father's professional career was due to the memory crystal he had left her. It was virtually identical to the other two that had been left to her brothers, only the contents were dissimilar. Hers contained her father's memories from some time after first contact to the moment that he was assigned the ambassadorship to Tiras, some 20 years later. There were holes in the continuity here and there, as some of his work had been for the Confederation and had been scrubbed from his memory chemically after necessity had expired. The majority of the recorded, or rather imprinted, memories had been of family. His first meeting with her mother, Taryn, their courtship and marriage, the birth of Ehrenfeld 7 months afterward, and then the subsequent family successes and struggles up to and after the addition of herself and her younger brother, Alson. Experiencing these memories through the crystal was nothing like watching the bioflicks on the feeds. Those were two-dimensional, both physically and figuratively. The memories swam through her consciousness and merged with her own, providing perspective to her own shared memories of her early life. Perhaps most jarring was the fact that her father's emotions had been attached to each, and they in turn were transferred to her mind upon experiencing them. The first time she had held the crystal in the now chaotically strewn office, she was a puddle of emotion. The second and third times had been more controlled. She had been more emotionally stable in preparation. Still, experiencing her own birth from her father's visual and emotional perspective was difficult. He had always seemed so stoic toward his family, always shuttered away in whatever office or project he was involved in at the time. But her feelings toward him were forever changed as she realized the depth of his love for his wife and children. His sorrow and grief for his own lack of emotional maturity came through as well and knocked her flat. In all of the years that she had spent studying materials science, and more specifically biocrystallography, she had never once experienced the personal transfer of memory from the crystals. Most experiments were in controlled environments, and any information that was transferred was sterile and efficient. Ever since the Manisae had gifted the technology to humanity, her focus had been singular, to understand and reverse engineer the strange and vastly different format for the benefit of human technological advancement. One of the advances that she had helped to achieve now sat pride of place on the shelf in the study, the selfsame crystal that had come so recently into her personal possession. The Manisae had given little to no information regarding their practical use when the first crystals were presented to the Confederation, so she and the scientists that had been a generation before her had been tasked with the enviable puzzle of solving them. When they had figured out how to efficiently imprint memory and emotion into the substrate, the possibilities of the bio-superconductor exploded. The crystals weren't mineral-based like those on Earth were. They were grown from a proprietary graphene and protein-based gel and were considered an organic material. Jin's doctoral thesis had proven the efficiency of the crystal to be significantly over that of human neurons and had helped to introduce the specialization of biocrystallography in materials science. Stalled out once again, as she stared at the object on her shelf, Jin shook her head and forced herself to prepare for bed. She would only have a few hours to sleep before needing to board the tram to Aryabhata University.